Alrighty. So, all right. So this week we're going to go over some sections. We're going to talk about the Book of Numbers, and then so the thing that we're going to start out with though is something that's fairly fascinating. Is the whole idea of Azazel in Leviticus 16:6-10, and you have this goat that goes out to Azazel. One for, you have one for Yahweh and one for Azazel. And so then you think, well, what does that mean, right? So, which is weird because some of yours say scapegoat, right? So some of your translations probably say scapegoat. And we will be in Leviticus 16:6-10 for a minute. So if you want to go ahead and look at that, that is something that we won't just blaze through and then be done. So it says, Aaron shall offer the bull as a sin offering. There you go, sin offering, for himself, and shall make atonement for himself and for his house. Then he shall take the 2 goats and set them before the Lord at the entrance of the tent of meeting. And Aaron shall cast lots over the 2 goats, one lot for the Lord and the other lot for Azazel, right? So then you're like, well, Azazel. And Aaron shall present the goat on which the lot fell for the Lord, which of course is Yahweh, and use it as a sin offering. But the goat on which the lot fell for Azazel shall be presented alive before the Lord to make atonement over it, that it may be sent away into the wilderness to Azazel, right? So it's like, well, what's going on there? First of all, notice that we have, again, the casting of lots, right? And so, and it's not looked at negatively, right? And so remember we talked about casting lots, and we said, okay, I'll take your necklace, your glasses, your watch, and whatever else, your pen, and then we put them in a thing, and then we shake it up and down, right? Hello. We shake it up and down, and whatever pops out, that's how we know who's involved in whatever it is we need to do. Well, this is not one of those situations, right? Well, then we talked about the Urim and the Thummim, that we don't know for sure what that is, but what it seems to be is that one is the Urim, I think it is seems to be the dark stone, and then the Thummim seems to be the light stone, and so that's more of a yes or no, or this one, that one, right? And so, and then of course we have to put that in the breastplate of the priest, and you got Aaron doing it, so you put 2 and 2 together, and then I don't teach math, but pretty sure that's 4. And so, yeah. So seriously, so it seems like maybe that might be involved, right? It clearly says that they're casting lots, and so maybe, you decide, one is for the one for Yahweh, and one is for the one for Azazel. And so maybe that's what's going on with the lots. The problem here is that we do not know what the word Azazel means, right? So there's no it's ambiguous as to what that means. So there are 3 possible interpretations. So the first possible interpretation is that Azazel is a compound word consisting of Az, which means goat, and Azel, which means to go, which would be the goat to go, right? So, yeah, goat to go. Yeah, like a goat to go with a large order of fries and a Diet Coke. You can even have Uber Eats deliver it to your house. I would like a goat to go. I wanted this goat cooked, So in that case, it would be the one for sending away, right? The goat to go, as a better translation, we could say the one for sending away, right? And of course, it's sent away with the sins of Israel, right? So this is where you get the traditional rendering. And just for the record, I know we're good Baptists, but traditional doesn't always mean right, okay? So sometimes it's just what people have believed for a long time, but it doesn't mean necessarily that it's the correct interpretation. We have different information, like we constantly have new information. Now, we're not going to find new information that's like, well, Jesus, he didn't die on the cross or whatever, right? But some of these obscure understandings or passages and such, they may help us there. So this is the view of the Septuagint and the Latin Vulgate. Remember, we talked about the Septuagint. The Septuagint is the what language? Greek translation of the Old Testament, right? So that's the Septuagint, okay? And again, that's important because it's the Bible of the New Testament authors, right? So that's their Bible was what we call the Old Testament, but it was in Greek. And the Latin Vulgate, which again is way later, in about 300 and some odd AD. The Latin Vulgate, you know, because we talked about the word Lucifer in Isaiah 14:12. And then we talked about that word means morning star, right? It doesn't mean, it has nothing to do with Satan. The word Lucifer itself. The problem with this interpretation or this translation is that generally Hebrew words don't work that way, right? So they don't make compounds that way, right? Unless it's a proper name. You have proper names that are put together with different words because they mean different things, and so you want to put those two words to mean, to make the proper name mean something. But just in general, they don't do that, right? So that's a problem grammatically. So I'm going to skip all this because that's the more fascinating one. The third option, I guess I put it third. It kind of makes it anticlimactic, but I put it third, I guess, because it's just the shorter answer. So I'll do it second. So the second one, then I'll call it the second one, is that Azazel is a geographic location, right? It could mean precipice or something like that. So it could mean that they're sending the goat off into the wilderness, maybe off a cliff or getting it away from us, right? So it's sending the sin away and it's going, which relates to the other, but it could be a specific geographic location. The problem is that we just don't know, like that's just a guess. It's like, well, it could be a geographic location, but it's not really, there's no real certainty there. So the last possible explanation is that Azazel is the name of a demon or another name for Satan, right? So ultimately what we say ultimately is that it could potentially be another name for Satan. Or let's say this. Let's say that Satan and Azazel is another name for the head of the fallen angels, right? So we could say it that way. So we'll talk about it like that, and then I'll give you a couple of other names. So note that verse 8 there contrasts Yahweh directly with Azazel in the casting of the lots. And so if Yahweh is one, say, being, right? So it either goes to Yahweh, the being, or it goes to Azazel, another being, right? So it could be that. The big deal, and again, this doesn't necessarily mean it's true, but Azazel is the name of a demon in later Jewish literature, right? So it is the name specifically of the head of the fallen angels. So again, we've talked about in the past, we talked about First Enoch. And First Enoch is written again in about 200 BC. It is a book that's clearly popular during the New Testament times because it's quoted in both Jude and alluded to in 2 Peter, right? I think it's 2 Peter 4, and then Jude like 6 through 15 talks about, and again, it quotes directly from it in Jude. And so again, does that mean that First Enoch should be in our Bibles? No, it does not. It just means that it's a popular book written during the day, and people read it, and it gives us, again, insight into the way Jewish people thought during that time. So in First Enoch, we have Azazel is said to have taught men forbidden knowledge. And so so part of that is metallurgy, right? So to work with metal. And so First Enoch in chapter 8, verses 1 and 2, it says, Azazel, which is Azazel, it's the same word, just spelled slightly differently. Azazel taught men to make swords of iron and weapons and shields and breastplates and every instrument of war. He showed the metals of the earth and how they should work gold to fashion it suitably, and concerning silver to fashion it for bracelets and ornaments for women. And he showed them concerning antimony and eye paint and all manner of precious stones and dyes. And the sons of men made them for themselves and for their daughters, and they transgressed and led the holy ones astray, holy ones being angels. And there was much godlessness on the earth, and they made their ways desolate. All right. So again, there you have Azazel is the head of the fallen angels and such, And he teaches all this forbidden knowledge. Now you say, well, wait a minute, what does they have against jewelry and makeup, right? So you ladies should not be wearing those things, right? Because it's in the Old Testament, it's in the New Testament. Paul talks about it, so y'all just need to stop. No. So, yeah. So why is that? It's because here, for instance, it would be associated with pagan religious beliefs and such. So that's the point. Just for the record, now look, I don't have any tattoos, so I don't have a dog in this fight. But tattoos, when it talks about marking your body and stuff, that has nothing to do with the people today shouldn't get tattoos, or Christians shouldn't get tattoos. Again, it has to do with pagan religious beliefs and such, right? And so you don't want to be associated with those pagan religions. And so today, most religions don't allow tattoos, right? So, or at least they frown on them in some ways. Not Christianity. Christianity in America, generally, we don't really care. But some of the other religions do. So today it's not associated with other religions. So that would not be prescriptive for all times that you can't do that. Same thing with jewelry. Sorry to say it, but men with long hair, you may have your own opinions obviously about those things. But yeah, those things have nothing to do with how we should do today. Those are culturally bound because they're associated with different things. Men with long hair would be associated with cult prostitution. And so obviously you don't want Christians to be associated with cult prostitution. Same thing with women and makeup and jewelry and all of that. Again, cult prostitution. We don't want the Roman Empire to think that that Christians have cult prostitution in their religion, because they were already unauthorized, and so they didn't want Rome to come down on them, and so that would be a problem. So those things are not prescriptive. But that's the deal here. So Azazel taught men to make weapons of war and to basically paint up women and stuff like the pagan worshipers. He is the leader, Azazel, however you look at it. He is the leader of the fallen angels who serves as a model for the book of Revelation's idea of the binding of Satan, right? So again, you can go watch my Revelation Bible study about all this, but so in the binding of Satan, all of that stuff in the book of Revelation, it all takes all of those symbols and stuff. Apocalyptic literature, which is what Revelation is highly symbolic, right? It's not meant to be taken literally. The symbols certainly mean things, right? And they do have, this symbol may equal a specific thing, but the symbols themselves aren't to be taken literally, right? So the example would be, obviously, Jesus is not literally a lion or literally a lamb, but it's the way John describes it symbolically, right? And so we have this whole idea of the binding of Satan, which seems to be the same idea that we have here in 1 Enoch. So in 1 Enoch, it says, to Raphael he said, go Raphael, which is, of course, one of the angels, and bind Azazel hand and foot, and cast him into the darkness, and make an opening in the wilderness that is in Duadale, or Dudale, through him, which I don't know what that is, and I didn't look it up, throw him there and lay beneath him sharp and jagged stones, and cover him with darkness, and let him dwell there for an exceedingly long time. So note that Satan is bound for 1,000 years, right? Cover up his face and let him not see the light. And on the day of the great judgment, he will be led away to the burning conflagration, right? So again, what happens to Satan at the end in the book of Revelation? What ultimately happens to him? He's thrown into the lake of fire, right? So it's a similar idea. It's really the exact same idea. And heal the earth which the watchers have desolated. The watchers actually are the angels. When I said holy ones earlier, that actually was probably humans. And announce the healing of the earth, that the plague may be healed, and all the sons of men may not perish because of the mystery that the watchers told and taught their sons, all those forbidden knowledges. And all the earth was made desolate by the deeds of the teaching of Azazel, and over him write all the sins, right? So you have the same idea of Azazel being bound in the earth like Satan in the book of Revelation. Note that he is cast to earth and appears in the form of an unclean bird in a book called the Apocalypse of Abraham, which is also an early book. That is not quoted, just for the record, in the New Testament anywhere. But again, it's a book that was around. It says, but it does sound a little bit like some of the New Testament stuff. It says, "And it came to pass when I saw the bird speaking, I said this to the angel, 'What is this, my Lord?' And he said, 'This is disgrace. This is Azazel.' And he said to him, 'Shame on you, Azazel, for Abraham's portion is in heaven, and yours is on earth. For you have selected here and become enamored of the dwelling place of your blemish. Therefore, the eternal ruler, the mighty one, has given you a dwelling on earth." Right? So he's cast down to earth. He has to stay on the earth. "Through you, the evil spirit is a liar." And through you, so you have the whole idea of Azazel as a liar that you get in the New Testament about Satan. "And our wrath and trials in the generations of men who live impiously. For the eternal mighty one did not allow the bodies of the righteous to be in your hand. So through them, the righteous life is affirmed in the destruction of ungodliness." And then it goes on and describes some other stuff that really is not terribly related. But you have this whole idea of Azazel as a liar and as leading people astray and all of that. So again, you have a similar idea in the New Testament as you get with Satan. So note, though, if you take Azazel as a demon, it must be pointed out that the goat is not sent out as a sacrifice to Azazel, right? That would be a violation of Leviticus 17:7. It says, "So they shall no more sacrifice their sacrifices to goat demons," right? So you have, again, kind of the same idea, "after whom they whore. This shall be a statute forever for them throughout the generations." So note, if it is a demon, then the goat bearing the sins of Israel simply goes back to where sin comes from, which is Azazel, this head of the demons or evil spirits or however you want to look at it. That seems to kind of be what it's talking about. And so just for the record, I know sometimes y'all probably think, I don't know, he seems to be talking crazy stuff. So just for the record, Zach was in here, was it 2 weeks ago? And after class, he came up and he said, "Azazel, I think that's a demon." And I was like, yeah, I think it might be too, yeah. And so I promise this is known information, all right? So you have three options. It's either scapegoat, which seems unlikely grammatically. It's either a geographic location, which we have no real background, or it's a demon or the head of the evil, evil, however you want to look at it. But even then, that's a later idea that's kind of read back on it, and we don't know that people actually believed that in this time. And so ultimately, in the end, we went through all that, and so what is the answer? We don't know. But those are the three most likely, right? So those are the three most likely. All right, the book of Numbers in general, we're going to go over some stuff just from the book of Numbers. Note that the Hebrew title, "In the Wilderness," comes from the first verse, "in the wilderness," right? And so the English title comes from the Greek arithmoi, which is named for the two censuses, right? There's a census in chapter 1. There's a census in chapter 26. And so arithmoi is the name of the book, which means numbers, right? The book covers roughly 40 years, which is really, technically, it's 38 years and 9 months of wilderness wanderings, right? So that's what the book of Numbers is. It's the wilderness wanderings years, all of that. Then eventually you'll get to the book of Deuteronomy. And basically Deuteronomy is preparing us to take the Holy Land, right? And then you get to Joshua, and then we're taking the Holy Land, right? So that's kind of how that all works out. So the two censuses show that God is faithful to the covenant. The faithfulness is in contrast to the consistent lack of faith shown by the Israelites, which culminates in outright rebellion. But when we look at the censuses, and it shows us all these people that are in Israel, well, that tells us, look, he fulfilled that part of the deal, of the covenant, where he made Abraham's people, many and plentiful, right? And so that shows that. So what are the practical reasons for the census, right? So first of all, the censuses, they tell us how many soldiers we have, right? So if we have to go into battle, which eventually we're going to take the land of Canaan, so we need to know how many fighting men we have. So it's assessment of soldiers. Also, we have a lot of work that needs to be done, right? And so we're gonna need to know how many able-bodied workers we have. And then taxes, because we always need taxes, right? Once you form a government, you need taxes. I won't say anything else. I'm just going to keep going. All right, so that's basically, so what's the deal with the book of, you're like, what are all these numbers and stuff, right? That's what they are. That's basically, that answers that question. Now, you have an overarching theme, right? And part of the overarching theme is, the overarching theme is Yahweh testing his people, right? So what is that all about? Yahweh testing his people. So note that Adam and Eve are tested in the Garden of Eden, right? And so, of course, they failed that test fairly miserably. Abraham is tested in his willingness to sacrifice his son Isaac, right? Which he passes that test. And again, just for those of you who, may come and go at different times, when we look at the sacrifice of Isaac or the potential sacrifice of Isaac, we may think, well, why in the world would he be willing to go there? But again, remember, Abraham was basically a Canaanite, right? He's an Amorite. And so they would be familiar with human sacrifice and sacrificing children to gods like Chemosh and Molech and such as that. And so it wouldn't be as crazy to him as it seems to us, right? So we think, well, Abraham, what is your deal? Well, again, these days, if you heard a voice saying sacrifice your child, then hopefully you would get medicated or at least go see the doctor. Maybe you would tell someone. But for Abraham, he might have been like, well, this is unexpected, but not completely unheard of. Joseph is used to test his brothers, right? Whether they've changed their hearts, because again, they're going to make up the tribes of Israel, right? And so, and then technically you have two of them that basically are on the outs because their hearts, it turns out they were pretty bad. And so, but basically you have the 12 tribes of Israel, and so Joseph is used to test them to see if they've changed their ways. And whether they are worthy enough, nobody's ever worthy, but whether they're worthy enough to basically create God's people, which we're there now, right? So the wilderness wanderings are also a test of covenant loyalty, right? So we talked all about the covenant and all of that, and so we talked about covenant loyalty, we talked about covenant curses and blessings, and remember, one of the important things that we said is God is glorified regardless, right? So if he has to punish his people, he's still glorified. And people around look and they say, okay, we look at good, loving parents who are good to their kids, but then they discipline them when necessary, right? And we look at those parents and we think, good job, right? Good and faithful son. So Deuteronomy 8, 1 through 2, for instance, says, the whole commandment that I commanded you today, you shall be careful to do, that you may live and multiply and go in and possess the land that the Lord swore to give to your fathers. And you shall remember the whole way that the Lord your God has led you these 40 years in the wilderness, that he might humble you, testing you to know what was in your heart, whether you would keep his commandments or not, right? And so again, you have, they're being tested to see if this is going to work, right? Note, and again, these are going to be fairly quick, so, you could try to turn to them if you want, but they'll just be single verses. But note that David is later tested by his own words, assuming he's the psalmist in Psalm 17 and 26. He says at 17:3, Psalm 17:3, you have tried my heart, you have visited me by night, you have tested me, and you will find nothing. I have purposed that my mouth will not transgress, right? So when he says you will find nothing, he means you will find nothing bad. Psalm 26:2 says, prove me, O Lord, and try me, test my heart and my mind. So he welcomes the testing of God, right? Note that Job is tested, and at 23:10 it says, but he knows the way that I take. When he has tried me, I shall come out as gold, right? And so Job sees the testing of God as a refining, right? In the New Testament, Stephen sums up the reason for the Israelites' disobedience at Acts 7:39. He says, our fathers refused to obey him, but thrust him aside, and in their hearts they turned to Egypt. So they were not loyal. They were loyal to Egypt, right? Because that's what they knew. And we want to blame them, right? And we say, well, God, God did all these things. But, they grew up in Egypt. They very likely worship their gods. They're a little uncomfortable at this point. And so, oftentimes what do when we get uncomfortable? We go back to what we know, right? And so that's what they want. They want to go back to Egypt. Note that even Jesus is tested in the wilderness, and this is going to be very important, and he passes where Israel failed. So it is no mistake that Jesus goes out for 40 days and is tested in the wilderness. That is, when I say symbolic, I'm not, just for the record, I'm not saying that it didn't happen, right? I'm just saying that when Jesus literally goes out into the wilderness for 40 days and is tested by Satan, that is meant to be symbolic of when the Israelites were tested for 40 years and they failed. And so Jesus, as the perfect Israelite, he passes where Israel failed, right? And so that's on purpose that it's 40 days, because that's meant to make you think back and say, oh, he passes the test, right, in the wilderness. So this we will be in, we'll read the whole thing. So Matthew 4, 1 through 11, if you want to go there. Matthew 4, 1 through 11. Then Jesus was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. Who sent Jesus out to be tempted by the devil? The Holy Spirit sent him, right? This is not some accident that Satan suddenly showed up. Like, this is what's supposed to happen. He is sent out specifically to be tested by the devil or Satan. And after fasting 40 days and 40 nights, he was hungry. And the tempter came and said to him, "If you are the Son of God, command these stones to become loaves of bread." But he answered, "It is written, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God." Note, just for the record, I'm pretty sure, if I'm not, it might be that 2 of these come from Deuteronomy and 1 comes from Numbers, but I think all 3 of these come from Deuteronomy, if I'm not mistaken. Either way, they come from the law. Every time Jesus quotes, he's quoting from the law. Then the devil took him up to the holy city and set him on the pinnacle of the temple, and said to him, "If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down, for it is written, he will command his angels concerning you, and on their hands they will bear you up, lest you strike your foot against a stone." Jesus said to him, "Again it is written, you shall not put the Lord your God to the test." Again the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory. And he said to him, "All these I will give you if you will fall down and worship me." Then Jesus said to him, "Begone, Satan, for it is written, you shall worship the Lord your God, and him only shall you serve." Then the devil left him, and behold, angels came and were ministering to him. So, again, what does he rely on his entire time that he's tested? The Word of God, right? So that's what he relies on. And he relies on the Word of God from the law itself, right? So again, important there. The author of Hebrews states about Jesus' testing at Hebrews 4, 14 through 16, since then we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God. Let us hold fast our confession, for we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who in every respect has been tempted as we are, yet without sin. Let us then with confidence draw near to the throne of grace, that we may receive mercy and find grace to help him in time of need. So note, the point that he's making is that Jesus went through the testing. Like he lived a normal life, right? Now he's God, which is crazy to say that he lived a normal life, but he's both 100% God and 100% man, right? And so I know I said earlier I don't teach math, but just for the record, that's what Paul says. Okay, so I know that doesn't work out mathematically, but that's what it is. That's how it's described by Paul. And so he lived a normal life insofar that he dealt with all the human things that humans had to deal with, yet he didn't sin. And so he passed the test. He's the perfect Israelite. So therefore, he's the one who gets to then take those sins and be the atoning sacrifice for us, because he did perfect by the law. He's the perfect example of the law. Note that James takes pride in moments of trial, right? As he also sees them as testing, kind of like Job does. Really just like Job does. James 1:2-4 says, "Count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds. For you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness. And let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing." Right? So now, this is where we often get twisted in our theology, right? And I'm not saying it's dangerous like you're a heretic or whatever, but we have to be careful of how we speak of the testing of God, particularly in all situations, if we try to make it a blanket statement. Because bad things happen to good people, right? It's just the way it is. We live in a fallen world, and if you, as Don Carson, he has a video. He's a Bible scholar, and he has a video. He's Canadian, so he has kind of a cool accent. But he says that if you live long enough, then you will suffer, right? You will suffer. If you live long enough, right, you'll suffer. And so, which doesn't take, very long before most people will suffer. So what does that mean? Does that mean that every time I go through a hard, difficult time, that God is specifically testing me with like cancer or death in the family or whatever that? No, not necessarily, right? Particularly when we talk about death in the family and things like that. No. We are going to be inherently tested in those moments, right? So no matter what happens to you, when you have something bad happen to you, it's going to test your faith. That is inherently a test of your faith, right? And so that's the thing. I think oftentimes we think, or sometimes we'll hear people say, God is testing you, right? When something terrible is happening, right? Like, whatever, and I don't want to give examples because I don't want to make light of any examples, but let's just say something really, really terrible happens, and then somebody comes up and they say, well, God's just testing you. You're going to make it, right? Well, no, not necessarily. We live in a fallen world. Bad things happen. We could say your faith is being tested, but it doesn't mean God sent calamity on your life to test you, right? But when those bad things happen, it's going to show out how your faith holds or doesn't hold, right? So it's inherently testing just when bad things happen. And so, I hate to say it, and some people will be like, I don't know. We're not persecuted in the United States, okay, for our Christianity. There are some people who are, right? Very rarely, okay? Like you see, and I'm not, I won't go into all the details, so where I don't talk about it, but, we get people that lose their businesses, right? For political reasons, things that go against people's religion, and then, that's against my religion, and then the government comes in, they take your business, right? Then you get sued for whatever. That is persecution, okay? That is real persecution. That's a real deal. And that's exactly the type of persecution, just for the record, that the book of Revelation talks about, right? It's that economic persecution because you stay true to your faith and you lose everything, okay? Now, that's persecution. But that is rare in the United States, right? I mean, generally what happens, people say bad things about Chick-fil-A or whatever. We get our feelings hurt. We run to Chick-fil-A and buy a bunch of chicken sandwiches or chicken nuggets. And then Chick-fil-A makes millions and millions and millions of dollars. And I'm not saying that Chick-fil-A is bad, right? I'm just saying that's generally what happens, right? And then, boom, then it's like, oh, they had a great day. And we see the lines and we're like, see, it all worked out, right? I mean, honestly, that's generally the extent of the persecution that we here in Morris, Alabama are ever going to see, right? Thankfully, in a way. You look over and how are our churches doing? In general, our church is doing great, right? Our church is doing great. But in general, how are churches in the United States doing? They're not doing well at all. They're closing churches right and left, right? You go over to places like China where there's real persecution. You have businesses shut down all over the place because of people who claim to, I don't mean claim like they're not. I say once they claim that they're Christians, then they're actually persecuted. You certainly have people that disappear in different parts of the world for their Christianity. That's real persecution. But where does Christianity really excel, or what am I trying to say? Grow. Where does Christianity grow? Here or in places like that? Places like that, right? Christianity has always grown under persecution. In the first century, it grew because of persecution. When you are persecuted or when things get bad, you have to make that decision, right? So at that point, it's put up or shut up. And luckily, people will cling to God and they'll say, you know what? I'm going to remain faithful and I'm going to put my faith in God to get me through this, right? That's when Christianity grows. When we live in the United States where there is very little persecution, we're just like, hey, thanks God, everything's good here. I don't really need anything. So, appreciate it. Appreciate you being there, but I don't need anything. And our churches are closing because we have a hard time as humans, and always have, in being loyal and having faith when things are going well, right? And so when we talk about testing and when we look at James and what James says, welcome that testing, notice he doesn't say there that God is sending calamity on us to test us. He's just saying, be glad when tests come because it will make you more faithful, right? That's the point. And that's the thing about testing that we need to understand. And so all that testing of God's people, that's the way you look at it. You look at we're inherently going to be tested through bad things that happen. Now, again, am I saying that God will never test a person specifically? No, I'm not saying that. But I'm saying that should not be your default assumption, right? And when somebody is going through something terrible, somebody in the family dies or whatever, it's not usually a good idea to go to them and say, well, God is just testing your faith, right? Because that's not what I want to hear when something bad's happened, that God killed off little Johnny or, whatever it is because he wants to test your faith. That is not, it's not how that generally happens, right? And I can say this, I cannot think of an example in the Bible, maybe you can, where God killed someone to test other people's faith, except when people are doing wrong and God judges them and kills them, and then the rest of the people say, oh, hey, I don't want to do that. But that's a different thing. That's not testing their faith. That's saying this is a bad example. Don't be like these burnt up people, right? Because he usually kills them with fire, I'm just saying. All right. In Acts, it happens in Acts, right? When the two... Ananias and Sapphira, and they lie, and that whole point there is that they lie. It's not that they don't give all their money; it's that they lie about it, and they say they gave all their money, but they didn't. That's a bad example in the church, in the Christian community, and so he kills them off. And I can't help but to find the humor in that story when those people take off Ananias and they go out and bury him, and then the moment they come back, she's killed. And then they're like, well, you're going to have to bury them too. And they're like, well, dang, we just went and buried this other guy. I know, right? I know I have a warped mind, but that's what would put me out. I'd be like, oh, Sapphira's? No, I'd be like, seriously, we have to dig another hole? Like, God, this is really putting me out today. All right, let's talk about... I'm not right, I'm just saying. All right. All right, the Sabbath, the Sabbatical year, and the Jubilee year, right? So these are some of those things that I don't ever pay attention to, right? And so obviously as I'm studying all this stuff and I look at it, honestly, and sometimes it may be like, for you, it may be like, why are we even talking about this? But for me, I just go through in my little digital Kindle Bible and I just highlight the things that make me interested, right? And I'm like, you know what? I should probably know this. And so guess what? You're going to know it too. All right. So again, and we generally know this, right? The Sabbath is observed every seventh day, right? It is a day of rest for all in Israel, right? So Deuteronomy 5:14 says this. It says, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work. You or your son or your daughter or your male servant or your female servant or your ox, or your donkey, or any of your livestock, or the sojourner who is within your gates, that your male servant and your female servant may rest as well as you. So note, again, this is a social issue, right? the Sabbath day is to make sure that everybody is getting a day off, right? Because again, in the ancient world, particularly if you're a servant, I mean, we're just going to work you all the time, right? And so this is an issue where it's like, listen, you can't work every day, right? And so it's the same with the creation narrative, right? Why is it presented as 6 days of work and then a day of rest? It's because that's an example to the people. This is how your work week should look, right? And so that's part of that, of all that's going on there. So we kind of get that, right? So then we have the sabbatical year, right? So what is the sabbatical year? It's at Leviticus, I'm not going to read it, but it's at Leviticus 25, 1 through 7. It is observed every 7th year, right? So you have the 7th day as a day of rest. Then you have the 7th year, the sabbatical year, where the land is not touched, so that the poor people can come in and eat on the land of what grows there naturally. Hebrew debt slaves are freed, and debts are released, right? So that's on the sabbatical year. So 7th day, everybody has to rest. 7th year, debts are freed up, slaves are freed up, Hebrew slaves only, not outsider slaves. And then the land is to be untouched so that the poor can come in and eat. Then you have 7 sabbatical years, and either on the 49th year, but probably the 50th year, so it would be the year after the 7th sabbatical year, you have the Jubilee year. So what's the Jubilee year? The Jubilee year is in Leviticus 25. It is observed again at the end of 7 sabbatical years, on the 50th year probably. Land that is sold in the previous 50 years is then given back to the original family. So you could never lose your land forever, right? And so that was the point. And so, later on we're going to get to where all the land is divided up, right? And so what the Jubilee year does for us is it says, okay, let's say that great-granddad made some really bad, business decisions, and he lost all his money, so he had to sell his land, right? Which God says you can't sell your land permanently, right? So he sells the land. Well, now his family's messed up because, now everybody's homeless, right? So he's basically made everybody homeless forever. So now we're all going to be servants to other people because we don't have land of our own to live off of. So in the Jubilee year, that land goes back to the original owners. And so we don't have to worry about that, at least for 50 years, right? So that's the point of the Jubilee year. Also, note that slaves are also released, right? So why are slaves released in the Jubilee year? Because they get their land back. Now they have home land that they can work. So now we're going to go back and work the family land that we just got back, right? And so it releases everybody to go back and do what needs to be done so that they can now start providing for themselves. So it makes it so that somebody in your family can't basically lose your land forever, right? All right, we're going to go through really just a couple of really fast things, or a few relatively fast things. All right, so, and this again is somewhat fascinating to me just to read through it, but Leviticus 27, right? Which is all of these vows for service and of people and different things and taking them back, right? So basically what you're doing, remember we talked about holiness and we talked about being holy means that you're separated out for the Lord. Well, what you could do is you could separate it, you could put people into the service of God, right? Whether it be your family members or whatever it may be. And so then what's going to happen is, what if you say, well, wait a minute, I want that person back, or I don't want to do that, right? Well, then you have to pay the price of that person because you said you were going to do it. Well, let's say I've got this nice bull, and I'm like, you know what? I vow to sacrifice that bull on the Day of Atonement or whatever. And then, it gets closer and I'm like, man, I like that bull. Like he's big and whatever. I don't know, whatever. For whatever reason, I like to keep him. And so, well, you can't just say, you know what? I changed my mind. Nope, you're going to pay for the price of that bull because you said that it was in the service of God. And so therefore you're going to have to pay, right? And so it's to keep your vows honest, right? And so, because we can't just be saying we're going to do this. think back at Acts, right? Ananias and Sapphira, right? They say, hey, we vow to give all of the money for the sale of our land to the church. And then they give some of it, right? Well, their vow was not honest, and so they got killed to death. All right, Aaron and the Levites, right? So what is the deal? Like, how does that all work out, right? So note that Aaron and his family are the priests, okay? The Levites do everything else as far as in the service of the temple. We don't ever think about this, but they're the musicians. They do all the cleaning up, and they do everything. They tear the tent down or the tabernacle down, and they build it back when it needs to be built back. They do all of the work associated with the cult, right? The cult meaning the whole system of sacrifices and all of that different stuff. So the priests come in, they do their job. The Levites, they're responsible for the cult itself, and that includes the tabernacle and all of the stuff that goes with that, sacrifices and whatever parts they play. Of course, the priests are there with sacrifices, but the Levites also help and do all of those things. Note that the firstborn sons of Israel are set apart for the service of the Lord, right? It says that in there, and it's like, well, wait a minute. What does that even mean? But then later, it says that the Levites serve as substitutes for the firstborn sons of all of Israel. So basically what happens is all of the firstborn sons of Israel, you owe them to God to go and work for the cult, right? And so now that we have the Levites, well, we're going to allow the Levites to substitute for your sons so that so you don't have to give up your firstborn son, right? And so that's what the Levites do to you. Also, interestingly, their livestock also substitutes for the firstborn of all the livestock of Israel. So that way you don't have to give up your firstborn of all the livestock. Later on, remember, the Levites will not get land. When the land is divided up, they don't get land. They live at the temple complex, basically. And that's why tithes were instituted, right? So the tithe is instituted because the Levites, they don't have land to grow their food and stuff. And so tithes were food, right? And so what you would do is you would go and you would pay a tithe at the temple, at least in part. Now, later on, there's some tithes that have to do with renovating the temple and all that. But you would pay your tithes to the Levites or give them food, and that's what they lived off of. That was the point of the tithe, was for them to live, right? And so that was that deal. All right, I just always was thinking, in terms of the Levites, note that the bread of the presence, right? The bread of the presence. Like what's the deal there? So you get 12 loaves of bread, which represent the 12 tribes of Israel, and they sit right there. So you've got the Holy of Holies, which is the most holy place, right? And it's got a curtain there. And then just outside that, you have the bread of the presence. And it stays there right by the Holy of Holies, right? And so it's like holy bread. I was going to say, it's like the youth rolls at O'Charlie's. It's holy bread. Not really. With lots of butter, they're good though. So, all right. Do what? Swiss cheese? Okay. And so, but part of the deal there is note that the Levites come in and they change out the bread, right? Well, what do they do with the old bread? They eat it, right? So that serves as part of their food rations, right? And so this again, not only is it there and it represents the 12 tribes, but then ultimately the point is that it feeds the Levites who are doing all the work, right? Or at least the work of all of that. All right. So there's that. Boom, boom, boom. I told you I was going to be early at 7:28. Thanks for watching, and please feel free to leave a comment or question. And if you found this video helpful, hit like. And if you would like to be notified when new videos are released, hit subscribe and join us next time as we study the Bible in context.